This is Scott Rutherford with the ASQ Six Sigma Forum. I'm at the 2013 Lean Six Sigma Conference in Phoenix, Arizona. With me is Jim Bowie, one of the keynote speakers, who's on your left, and I have Mike Levy on your right, who is currently the program manager for the Continuous Process Improvement initiative with the Marine Corps. What you have in front of us is roughly 25 years experience working with continuous process improvement in the military in one form or fashion. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell you our opinions. None of what you're going to hear is a direct reflection of our employers, but just simply our observations over time of what we've seen in regards to Lean Six Sigma deployment and what the future may hold. So gentlemen, let's start with the first question. Lean and Six Sigma have been around the uniformed services in some form since 2002. What successes have they achieved using these methodologies? I'll start with you, Jim.
Sure. I think a lot of the successes have come in the form of the more physical processes, maintenance, logistics, transportation, supply chain management. We've seen a great deal of success in those areas, including when I was in Baghdad, Iraq, with 3rd Corps. We redesigned the entire redeployment process to get units out of the country faster as we were bringing new units in. It just made sense, and it was physical, we could see it, and with back then the introduction of Blue 4 Tracker, we could actually implement technology in with this and integrate that. So the capabilities just increased. It's very obvious why it would work on a flight line, for example, because you can see what you're working with. So I think in those areas, we've had a great deal of success.
Yeah, and I would concur, Jim, absolutely. In those areas that are very much manufacturing oriented, those are the obvious applications. You look at the history of Lean Six Sigma coming out of a manufacturing environment. Those applications made sense, the easiest places to measure success, and that's where we've seen some of our biggest successes overall in terms of getting results in return for Lean Six Sigma in the Department of Defense.
And you're right. The greatest number of successes are in the what I used to call the physical processes when I was teaching. It's the administrative processes that really are kind of, and in the private sector, it's the same way. It always starts in manufacturing and rolls from there. So there is a lot of successes, and the things to me is trying to gather those together. So let's talk about the flip side of things. What forces challenge the current implementation of Lean Six Sigma in the Department of Defense?
I think one of the forces that challenges is the lack of understanding. What can you utilize this for? I hear a lot of stories, and I have a lot of deployment leaders or senior leaders come forward and say, I want to use Lean Six Sigma for this answer that I've already come up with, for example. Not understanding that what Lean Six Sigma might show you is that it's actually a different root cause than your assumption led you to believe. And it ties back to data and the scientific method, and it makes us have greater discipline in what we approach. So I think there's a lack of understanding that leads against that. I think the other problem is the fact that very little of what we do in DoD is physical. Now again, warfighting is very physical, but if you really look at the administrative side of the house, the transactional, the service-oriented side of the house, processing approvals, requesting orders, everything that we do, a vast majority of the processes and the money in the Department of Defense, all those funds are tied up more in those invisible processes. So we can affect logistics, manufacturing, maintenance, all we want. And we're still not going to make a huge hit into a cost savings that would actually generate interest and then help to fulfill more of a sustainable program that would help us move forward. I think that's really working against us, is the lack of recognition that this could be applied to those invisible processes.
I would agree with that. I would add on to that. There's other challenges too. One, of course, is the lack of active, visible leadership, particularly amongst our uniformed officers. And their focus is different than the civilians. The civilians stick around year after year, often in the same agency, the same service. So we see that as, I think, a risk factor, a challenge going forward. Also, the current environment with reduction in funding, I think, challenges in terms of training and application of Lean Six Sigma, things of that nature. I think there's also challenges, of course, in office-type environments where it's much harder to separate out the actual process flow because people tend to do multiple things. So it's a lot harder to apply, at least some people think it is, a lot harder to apply in office-type environments. I think these are challenges going forward. I think there's also been challenges around the idea of Lean Six Sigma not maturing to a higher level than the tactical level events, and there's a belief that maybe it can't be applied to the larger, larger muscle movement type processes, the core value streams that cut across stovepipes and things of that nature. I think a lot of these are additional challenges for Lean Six Sigma going forward.
And I'm going to add one more other thing that I've seen is that need to kind of think outside the usual. For a lot of our administrative processes, there is a real need to be able to do that. When I was teaching in the Navy, the two projects that really come to mind was from a installation commander, as a matter of fact, as he was going for his black belt, to where he wanted to take, he had a real problem with out-processing from outside of the continental United States, and making sure a sailor really cleared the installation of all the problems. Well, he said, look, that's not the case. We got to make sure, rather than dealing with all the little things that makes a person check out of an installation, how do we make sure that the individual is fully cleared, and what can we do to minimize that time? So there was a lot of administrative values to be able to do that. So it's rather than looking at the individual process, it's more of the thinking of the holistic view totally on all that. And I think that's probably what I see is the biggest challenge is because of sometimes it's too hard, we think in little slices, when in reality we need to kind of lift our thinking and look more holistically across things to really get the bang for the buck in a lot of administrative processes. The other one I'm looking at was an organization that was dealing with submarine drawings. Fortunately, their entire organization was in one building, and they did a workflow analysis and said, we've got to reconfigure organizations within the building. Of course, the challenge is, well, when you do that? They said, okay, I'm going to make a commitment to do that, I'm going to invest the time. They did it over the weekend. Friday, they were the old way. Monday, they were the new way. Very successful at it for that one black belt. You know, he was just shocked at how things worked out and the savings. He couldn't put it. He said that it was close to a couple $1 million in regards to savings, but obviously it was those indirect savings. It wasn't, we weren't cutting people out, but just in the travel time and everything else, being able to do that, there was a significant thing that they could do. So it comes down to, if we're going to invest, we've got to be creative in how we invest, and especially in the current times that we've got.
So, and that's something, a lot of what you said was interesting, not just one thing. But something's very interesting, and we've talked about this, and there's not a lot of people who bring this up, but I think we need to put it on the table, is the fact that you have an installation commander going for a black belt. You know, we said we need senior leadership to understand and to buy into this and to support it. I think one of the problems we have is that we've got, and again, if you're watching this and this is your rank, well, if this offends you, too bad, but if it doesn't, then great. We have a lot of lieutenant colonels who are about 6 months out from retirement getting certified as black belts. Why?
It's a resume pattern.
Exactly. Why aren't we educating, why aren't we making our next black belts our captains, our first lieutenants, so that they can grow up through the system with this understanding and not have to be a technical expert once they hit installation commander level, but they sure as hell will know how to manage these individuals because they've been there. Now, you don't always need a technical expert to manage a group of technical experts. Sometimes actually that's the worst mix because they've already got their opinions and bad habits. But we do a lot of that, and I see a lot of that where I'll look at a roster and there's colonels, lieutenant colonels, majors on the roster going through this, and I'm looking at it from an investment standpoint saying, how many more years as a taxpayer am I getting out of this person in that role? We need to bring it in the junior ranks. That's where we're really going to change it. I don't want to say grassroots, because grassroots mean they develop it themselves, but almost at the fledgling level, so to speak, so that as they grow and mature with the organization, they bring those practices with them. And I don't know how to get around it. I don't want to get into age discrimination and all these other things that could be there politically. But I'm saying if it was my business, I would not be spending money on certifying individuals who had 2 years left with me and I knew they were going to retire. How do we do that and invest wisely in the future? I don't know. But I do see a lot of that in the training that is conducted.
And that too can be situational.
Sure.
We don't see as much of that on the Marine Corps side of the house. We've tried to certainly discourage people from getting trained as a belt just before retirement trying to put steps in place to kind of keep that from happening and try to approach particularly, lower level, more junior officers so that the same issues you're talking about, to try and get that consistency and get it into the culture at a much earlier stage. But of course that takes time, and time is our enemy actually right now too, given the current environment.
Yep. So with that, what we need to kind of turn the conversation to is more of how do we deal with sequestration? That is a major challenge in regards to the deployments of Lean and Six Sigma. So I guess the question comes down to is there's some talk to where, okay, I'm going to change my deployment model because I see that Lean and Six Sigma are fully integrated in my program. Okay, they believe that after 2 or 3 years, we've done it enough that I don't have to put all that emphasis on that. Or, so with that, given that atmosphere, will Lean Six Sigma go the way of total quality management and TQM in the late 80s, early 90s that DoD had? What things should we be doing to make sure that Lean Six Sigma still remains viable, since it's a valuable tool to the Department of Defense?
I tell you, if I was in charge tomorrow, one thing I would be emphasizing is utilizing Lean and Six Sigma to justify and set the levels that we are reducing, rather than trying to back into it, utilizing methodologies to justify an arbitrary declaration. We always say 10%, 20%, 25%, and we just draw a line in the sand. That's what it's got to be. Why don't we utilize these tools to analyze what we need to do for our customers, what we need to do to our enemies, and then utilize the discipline and the analysis to actually come up with, well, here's what we really need in order to do that. Rather than saying, well, too bad, you've got half your players tomorrow, you're going to have to win the Super Bowl with a 6-man team. And it's much more difficult that way. And I'm not sure if people understand the complexity that really introduces into the functioning of the organization itself. You have just destroyed any efficiency that they've gained at that point, because the next year will be spent now on trying to justify actions that will, in a sense, react to arbitrary numbers with data. So we're becoming extremely subjective at this point, and we're utilizing it now at this point in an ineffective measure, because people will always have the argument, well, these cuts were arbitrary and we shouldn't have done them anyway. Well, okay, you have justification of that argument. So how do we do it? Well, obviously we're going to need to use it to do more with less. I know that the thing we talked about earlier is doing less with less, but doing more with less is definitely going to come into play. And Lean Six Sigma can be a guide in doing that, but it's not supposed to be, neither methodology or theory of constraints or business process reengineering. It's supposed to be reactionary. This is supposed to be forward-thinking, progressive. The tools can be used in different ways, but I can use a hammer to put a screw in through some wood. It doesn't mean it's going to go in the right way or exactly like we liked it. So it's, at this point, I think, really optimizing what we have remaining after the cuts. What we have after everything drops off, how do we do the best we can with what we got? Lean Six Sigma does have the answer, but it has to be applied appropriately.
I would agree with that. I think that going back to the idea of the challenges, I think that would be a challenge in the current environment, because in many parts of government, to include DoD, Lean Six Sigma has not matured to the level where it's thought of as a strategic tool. So it's still thought of primarily as a tactical level tool, and if it's seen as a tactical level tool, you're not going to see people using it at that strategic level to work on these big issues that we have to deal with. So I think there's a little bit of a situation there where, given the current state, it's not seen as what it could be, what we know as practitioners who've been doing this for many, many years, and think about the way we would do it if we had a clean sheet of paper. So I think that gets back to the idea of the challenges. But I would absolutely agree. There's the opportunity to use it differently and in a more strategic way, so that we can look at what do we really need versus, okay, we're going to cut you 20%. So now how do I get down get our efficiency up so that it gets us down below that number? Yes, we're kind of backing into it if you want to think of it that way.
Yeah, it's not only we're going to cut you, but we're going to cut you by this arbitrary number. And by the way, you better not fail. Because that's the pressure the DoD feels. Let's be real about it. When would it be acceptable to come back and say, I lost a soldier today because of sequestration? When would that be okay? Never. Or a Marine, or a sailor, or an airman, any one of the brothers or sisters across the Department of Defense. Never acceptable to fail. And so but we keep doing this. Or we would never accept this anywhere else in our lives. You would never accept it if your wife, for example, we're all there. If our wife sends to the store and said, here's $50, go buy me that $100 thing at the store. Okay, I can't do that. Oh, you would never even, it wouldn't even be a conversation, right? Unless it was a crazy day and something weird was happening. Anyway, it wouldn't be a conversation.
There's a sale.
But if it was $100, it's $100. If it takes us, like you were saying, if the requirements say, 81,000 of this, then we better damn well have 81,000 of that. Just setting a number out and then making people fudge in to hit that goal, you're forcing people essentially to lie at that point, and that's what you're forcing people into.
So I'm going to turn it a little bit, and I can see this as an opportunity. Again, I'm going to go with the theme about thinking outside the box. If you listen to what the current environment has been, it's like, okay, it's all doom and gloom. These are the things that we're going to cut. It's going to affect your livelihood, all those types of things. So really, I don't think the solutions have really been thought about yet as to saying, okay, we know we're going to do this. How can we do it better rather than just doing it as we're doing it the old way? And I think that's where Lean Six Sigma, we need to push, do that, what my old boss called courageous leadership type of thing, and be able to say, no, let's try this. What have we got to lose? We're going to get the cut anyway, as long as we're not hurting anybody, as long as we're not increasing those types of things. Let's try doing X and seeing where it takes us. And I think that type of creativity at the executive level may be missing. We fall back on the old tried and true methods, and I think part of all that is for us to be able to push, okay, well, why aren't we pushing the boss? Why don't you try this? And I think that's going to be the great challenge, is that self-confidence as practitioners to be able to tell our boss, okay, I agree with what you got, but have you thought about this, and see how that works out, and push enough rather than just not accepting no the first time. So really, that's going to be a great challenge. I think we've got an opportunity that we could probably try to do.
And if you pair on that, another challenge is going to be when you actually do explore these issues and find out that the root cause has nothing to do with what the assumed root cause is. Then what do you do? And that's where you need leadership that will stand forward and say, I know this is what you told me, but this is what it is, and put their foot down. Because there is right or wrong. And we need to stand by what is right, which is going after the root cause, and what is wrong, which is chasing our tails, trying to address symptoms, which, let's face it, and it's not just that's not a federal issue. That's a commercial and a nonprofit issue too. Many large organizations spend 80% of their time chasing tails, and often it's their own.
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity, Scott. And I think leadership would have to look at Lean Six Sigma differently than they do today. One of the conversations that we've started in very early stages of is to talk with our leadership about leveraging CPI, Lean Six Sigma, in a way that we can use it to address the large muscle group types of issues that cut across the stovepipes in the Marine Corps, and say, rather than thinking of it as a tactical tool, a hammer to bang in a nail or a screw or something else, but to use the high-level practitioners, the master black belts, the people with decades of experience to address these large, thorny, expensive issues with a tremendous amount of weights across an entire value stream that cut across the organization. Now, again, very early in the conversation, but we are trying to encourage leadership to look at that capability differently than we have heretofore since the inception, going back into 02 and 05, and depending on which service you're in. So, still too early to talk about success or failure, but to try and have the conversation itself can be also very difficult to get that audience and have some open mind and open set of ears to talk about thinking about this differently than what they've known up till now. So
getting away from the problems as a wrap up, we know of a lot of successes that Lean Six Sigma has done for the Department of Defense. And we've seen some things that are happening to where the word is starting to get out to other executive branch agencies. Don't know much about the legislative branch or the judicial branch, but at least the executive branch agencies, how Lean Six Sigma can help with those types of things. Talk to me about, have you seen those things? What can we do to better get the word out? How do we give them the 1,000 points of light, show them the successes that we've had?
Well, there are other federal agencies using it. There's the FBI, there's the USDA. 17 agencies are using it at different levels. There's TSA. There's quite a bit utilization of Lean Six Sigma. Now, whether it's all appropriate or not, that's another question. But I think the real successes come into play when agencies can realize more or discover more about their similarities. They continue to argue about their differences. Now, I understand, for example, the support the USDA lends. I also understand the support that the DoD provides. And what I'm saying is that an approval process is an approval process is an approval process. You might have different stakeholders involved, but a best practice in one might go real well across FBI, across TSA, across USDA, throughout DoD. I think we need to start looking for those practices that we can bring up to a level and say, look, this is how we're all the same. We all have to go through a budgeting process. Okay? That takes a lot of time and a lot of people, and it costs us a lot of money, which again blows my mind. As taxpayers, we accept this. We pay a lot of money so we can figure out how to spend a lot more money. And in some cases, we pay money for different agencies to run very long processes to get at this, with heavily laden with people, and a lot of man hours spread out across that. And yet they're competing for the same money. So we're paying people to ask for money, the same money, and compete against each other for that. There's all kinds of ways to handle this with interactions that do occur between them, with similarities that do occur between their processes, and to capture those and broadcast those. So how do we get them to do it? We need to start stressing to our federal government that saving time and money is really important to the common taxpayer. I consider myself a common taxpayer. I'm not a civil servant. I used to be, but I don't do that anymore. That's not part of what I'm doing. I consider civil servants should be more accountable for it, because they're paying the money as a taxpayer and figuring out how to spend the money as my federal government. So it's understanding the fact that, one, we're the same, but the other part is stressing how important a return on investment is. And let's face it, there's a lot of people in the federal practice and there's a lot of people in the commercial practice, I don't want to single everybody out, but that don't understand what ROI even is, what a return on investment even is, or how to calculate it. And if you are in an organization, whether it be your church, whether it be your local Boy Scout troop, whether it be the Department of Defense at the highest levels, you better damn well understand how to use every dollar coming in if you want your organization to be successful. So I think understanding the common, sharing it across, but also putting that stress back on utilization. And guess what? Burning through dollars is no mission of any agency anywhere on this planet. There's supposed to be something coming back to the stakeholders. So what is that? Understanding it, and really elevating that as a key measure, not activity.
I would agree. There's opportunity that's not being tapped to share best practices. I mean, it's a challenge within organizations, and it's a challenge to do across organizations. I would say that I think it's got to even go beyond what you said, Jim, and to have some form of accountability for the cross-sharing, the cross-fertilization of best practices. As you said, many agencies have similar types of processes. Maybe not all. There is a human tendency to say, you know, we're different, we're unique, and what we do in my agency is different than what they do over there, and so it doesn't apply. But you're right, things such as travel. Every agency has travel and uses some form of travel system, for example, and every agency pays certain bills to contractors and others. And I think that's just two quick examples of many opportunities to replicate some best practices. I'm not sure that any of the services within DoD are really doing a really good job of it. We talk about it, and I think there's still opportunity there. But then to take that and, again, get that across different agencies is something that can be done better. Because many things have been learned over 20-some-odd years of Six Sigma and more than 50 years of Lean, for example, at this point. We know things that do work. We know certain things that don't work. And then the rest are varying degrees. Mm-hmm. So I think that rather than reinvent the wheel, starting from scratch and saying that we're different and we're going to start with a blank sheet, I think that I would agree, it's not the best use of taxpayer dollars. So now how to get that best done in the federal government space, I don't really know. That's not my area of expertise, but I think certainly there's opportunity to do more than is happening right now.
And I would think that, again, another opportunity in the current fiscal environment offers us the opportunity to kind of break down those barriers, to be willing to say, well, I've got a problem and I'm running out of solutions. Maybe I need to go find someone in a different agency that may be able to say, well, you've had this experience, what have you used to do? And really get to a conceptual base, and then apply the concept to a different environment. That's really where we start to become a more learning organization. That's to be able to be comfortable in understanding what the concept is and then saying, I can apply that and go and try and see what it is. And not be afraid to fail. It's given the short time frames where we're doing a lot of constant 18 to 24 month turnovers, that fear of failure sometimes it's going to dampen my ability to be able to rise. Sometimes we got to change that culture, and I don't have an answer for that yet to be able to do that. But it's still got to be fail to learn. We've got to learn. Let's take the opportunity to be able to do that in the current environment. So that's going to be a great challenge.
And culture, I think culture gets in the way sometimes there too, because it depends on the agency, of course, but in some agencies there's a culture of not admitting that we have problems, even within our own organization, let alone admitting that we have a problem to another organization. So I agree with you, if we can get at that, the root cause of that and say, hey, it's okay to admit that there's a problem and that there's not a blame culture, and therefore we can now go and work on fixing it, then that becomes something that's okay. But right now I think that some of the current culture, some of the agencies may actually work against that.
You know, it's a culture and a mentality that's becoming archaic by the second, to say, don't ever bring forward a problem unless you have a solution for the problem. How ridiculous is that to say to someone? They might not know how to generate the solution, so we've got 1,000 problems being hidden, because one, either people don't know, because they haven't been taught the tools, and it might not be a Lean Six Sigma tool, it might be another tool that helps them to learn the way, because I'm not going to say that's the fix for everything. But at the same time, it's either that, or they're afraid. Or they're afraid. And again, as an American, we're encouraging people to be afraid. And again, I challenge anyone to bring me one celebrated hero in America that we celebrate because they were afraid. It's the ones who took the chances. And you know what? We have to learn to accept the risk. And that's been a big, large part of my career, is I accept the risk. And there's going to be things I tell my clients that they don't want to hear. But it's the truth. And I've built a pretty good reputation on doing that. And I challenge everyone to step forward. If it's the right thing, bring it forward. Do your best. Bring it forward. Bring it into the light. If you fail and you go down in flames, then it's a glorious, glorious death, as the samurai would say. You did it. You died doing the right thing. You died in combat. You went into the battle for the right reasons. Rather than looking back 10 years from now and going, oh, somebody else came up with that and got applauded for it. I wish I had said that. I mean, how many times do you hear that around the office? I had that idea 10 years ago. Yeah, but you didn't have the guts to say it. And we need to get back to a culture in America where we encourage that. We encourage people to step out. Now we're in a culture where we encourage everybody to be themselves. We encourage everybody to be different. So that's working against us right now. How are we all different? Let's worry about how we're all the same, and then work on that courage to step forward and say, this is a problem, let's deal with it. Letting it slide is not going to make it better. There's no methodology out there that says ignore a problem and it will get better. But that's what we do on a consistent basis. And again, this is not limited in any way to the federal sector. I see this across the world, in commercial and nonprofit sectors as well. But the ones that succeed, the guys and gals that you see on the cover of Forbes magazine, or on the cover of any magazine who are celebrating business or best practices or innovation, are hardly the people who sat in the back room and waited for someone to come and say, hey, can you tell me your idea, and to really pull it out of them. They stepped forward, gave them their idea, they took the risk, they reaped the reward. That's really what it's all about at the end of the day. And I don't have the answer on exactly how to encourage that, but wouldn't it be interesting if we did have a federal agency come up with a best practice for a commonly accepted cross-cutting process like travel? Let's say someone found out how to do it in 15 minutes. Don't just kind of put your seatbelt on. They found out how to do this in 15 minutes. Total processing, get your travel plan, and that includes getting back and then loading in your expenses. 15 minutes. Why isn't that the new standard now? We've proven it can be done. Why not make it a standard? I would demand it again if it were my business. I would demand it. That all the plants operated the same way, to the same standard, that the standard being the fastest. Why don't we do it? And I think there's a million answers to that. We just have to learn how to answer them for each agency and to get cut through that fact.
Well, gentlemen, I've enjoyed the conversation. I know we could probably go another 10, 15 minutes more on what all this is, but probably our viewers were getting a little bit tired. So I want to thank Mr. Jim Bowie, Mr. Mike Levy for the conversation, and to you, our ASQ audience, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Scott.